let's go live now to political analyst and human rights defender. He's joining me here in the studio. Very lucky to be joined by you, Arno. Thanks a lot. I mean, these are interesting times, aren't they? I mean, we hear a lot about corruption. It seems to be quite rife in Ukraine. We've heard Zelensky saying that, you know, he's kind of turning a blind eye, if you like, to some aspects of what's going on. But my question to you, sir, is we've heard the New York Times talk about it. We've heard Seymour Hersh talk about it. When will the backers of Ukraine, the people who think, you know, Ukraine is still a country that needs to be, you know, helped, when will they start listening?
Well, that's a $64,000 question. Thank you for having me, by the way. Well, we have to understand that the backers of Ukraine are themselves compromised. And so everybody is holding each other up. You know, it's a kind of like Mexican standoff. The people, the entire U.S. political establishment is completely knee-deep into the corruption in Ukraine. Hence, the idea that despite Seymour Hersh reporting, which, you know, cannot be suffering from any kind of doubt, his track record speaks for itself, no major alteration, except for a few, you would say, making up the facade, you know, like this defense minister. I guess it was too big. They replaced him with someone who was very unsavory as much as the former incumbent. And so this is what we're most likely to see in Ukraine. When the situation becomes just too hard to manage metric-wise, optic-wise, they will proceed to some kind of makeup, you know, cleaning up. But the fundamental of it remain the same. Ukraine, by all accounts, is one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
Yeah, I think it's ranked 116th out of 130 or something. I mean, it's quite ridiculous.
It's par for the course in Ukrainian political culture. Corruption comes hand in hand with, you know, everything from a comedian becoming politician, president of the country, and so it's a big circus. It's some kind of grotesque clown show.
Yeah, it's interesting though when we see with the corruption. I mean, we're talking about, I don't know, billions of dollars have gone into Ukraine. You'd think that there'd be more of a fight, really, of what's going on, but this money seems to be disappearing. Now, in the New York Times article, which we didn't really open up to our viewers, but it was, the details was so much to say that the guy that was selling the arms to Zelensky was selling them through so many different shell companies that, in fact, if a bullet was, for argument's sake, $1, he was actually selling it to Ukraine for $20. I mean, and pocketing the difference. Now, that's the New York Times article. But my question to you, sir, is there has to be a stop. I mean, how can billions and billions and billions of dollars keep coming in? To where?
Well, Ukraine is a money laundering operation. We always have to keep that in mind.
Wow.
And if we take into account that structure, which was created shortly after the Maidan coup...
Well, where's the money going? It's laundering through to where? Back to Zelensky?
Back to the U.S. handlers, but through the U.S. embassy in Kiev. So NABU is the front structure, a National Anti-Corruption Bureau. It's staffed with a lot of strange characters, including some former Georgian shadowy figure who was quickly naturalized Ukrainian, so he could, you know.
Right.
And those people serve as conduit to the U.S. embassy in Kiev, which supervises themselves all the allocation of USAID money in diverse projects, including the fight against corruption, and including, what you might call it, the corruption within the General Prosecutor's Office. Remember that one of the first faits d'armes of NABU was this weird background story which saw a former SBU high official somewhat stumble onto compromising document, a black ledger. And the first thing he did, so the circumstances in which he got hold of the black book remains to this day very elusive. And this was never quite investigated, and in violation of Ukrainian procedural criminal law, he should not have waited as long as he did to go to NABU and report
Wow.
his findings. But it didn't matter. Fact is, Paul Manafort was the target, and it was in coordination with people like Han Applebaum, who started writing a first op-ed piece, I think, in the New York Times. It was first initially revealed by a Ukrainian newspaper outlet, very famous. And then within 2 weeks, everybody coordinated the campaign. But the idea was that, see, NABU is, cracking down on corruption, but technically going against,
So cracking down on corruption, but at the same hand,
going against the
getting fed
the people,
backhand.
the U.S. people, politicians who are profiting from Ukraine corruption, going after their political enemies in Washington, to the extent one of them might have been involved at some point as an advisor to the former President Yanukovych, for instance.
Yeah. Arno, look, you're a political analyst. Now, you've obviously been involved with and talked a lot about, situations around the world. When it comes to a conflict, when it comes to war, usually the biggest question is, who's making money? Who's making money? Because otherwise, people would sit down and have a discussion, wouldn't they? They'd sit down and go, look, you want that bit, I want this bit. Let's just work this out. Let's end this bloodshed. But somebody's clearly making some money out of this. Hence, but you said it was perhaps, I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said it was perhaps the backers themselves. But
Not perhaps.
But a big perhaps. But until when? I mean, when this has to stop, surely.
Well, in a real ethically based world, at the very least, one would start asking those questions. But we're dealing with people that have immersed themselves in this feeding frenzy. It's like they're feeding at the throat of Ukraine. And they're so compromised to such degree that the entire structure, the US political establishment, but also the arms manufacturers, the biolab and the big pharma experimentation through the biolab. So you really have every major structural player that matter in the United States, which has been involved in Ukraine. And everybody's got a lot at stakes. Billions of dollars have been invested. If they decided to create those labs and to conduct their experiment, their gain of function experimentation, it's to shirk U.S. law on those kind of activities on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
So this fits also in the geopolitical strategy, which, as we all know, was to use Ukraine as a bludgeon against Russia. And it just comes all together in a way, in such an extent that it's difficult to think, well, shouldn't somebody be the subject of a crackdown on corruption? So again, you will see at the margin some people being, not as good as they should be in PR or in trying to be discreet about what they're doing. But on the whole, it will continue.
Okay. Well, Arno, your title is also Human Rights Defender. So let's talk a little bit about the human factor in this. Now, perhaps the so-called neocons could be indeed invested in continuing the conflict in Ukraine so they can line their pockets. But does Ukraine have enough soldiers to let this continue endlessly?
Well, you're making a good point. Unfortunately, as we heard in the news recently, well, first of all, they're going after handicapped people, tuberculosis patient, HIV without the symptom, whatever that means. Women are now slated to become more and more involved in the war effort. And we're learning now that Poland and Germany are going to start hunting down some of the Ukrainian refugees and hand them back in violation of their own international obligation not to send people to what appears to be a certain death back to Ukraine. So we can expect more of this to go on. It's really, it's almost like a ritualistic offering, and when people say that they will wage war until the last Ukrainian, we should definitely take it, literally. And the question is, when they run out of Ukrainians, what then? if we take into consideration what we just discussed earlier, they cannot afford to lose Ukraine, because they lose Ukraine, it all comes out, all the secret comes out. Even NATO has this kind of mythical umbrella, which aims to protect, its members, is now exposed for what it is. It's a paper tiger. It has no, and so a lot of careers at stake, a lot of interest, corporate structural interest, deeply entrenched, a whole narrative, which has been pretty much peddled for the last 30 years for sure, but some would say even beyond that, is about to come down, crashing down. And so the emperor has no clothes, in other words.
Yeah.
This is really, in a way, a very dangerous situation, because they can only be tempted to think with a Hail Mary or a double down approach, they can somehow manage to snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat. In what way will this take place? That remains a mystery right now.
Arnaud, we're suddenly running out of time. I do have one more question. As a political analyst, we'll go back to that side. We've heard, we hear a lot about, remember Tucker Carlson? He came out actually quite recently and said that he thinks within a year this could be a hot war. What are your thoughts? We've only got about a minute or so, though. So.
Sure. Well, I was actually queried about this, as in what next, and I thought I spoke about this about 6 months ago on a radio show, and I'm worried to see that a lot more prominent people with more high, exposure are now somewhat coming to the same conclusion. We heard the same worries, the same concerns coming from Ms. Taylor Greene, a U.S. Congresswoman. So no, this is a real concern. Again, because they miscalculated so much, everything has gone drastically wrong. So, and despite all the billions, the media complex, they try to create this alternate narrative, and the facts are stubborn. And unfortunately, since they fleeced their own population, it's now becoming hot within the fortress, so to speak.
Yeah, well, let's hope that perhaps groups like the BRICS or the G20 or whatever it is, we come to bring both sides to a discussion and have a conversation, and this all ends. But Arnaud, if I pronounce your name correctly, Devalet, I hope. Thank you so much for joining me here in the studio. Ozzy, a pleasure talking to you, sir. Thanks again.
Thank you.